Imagine the impact created by your institution as your donors increasingly experience the joy of giving. Over time, fulfillment and meaning are added to this joy, creating donor bliss. When your institution embraces donor bliss as a priority, resources increase, key constituents are more deeply engaged, and the institutional mission produces greater impact. Using a model of how donors experience the transformation from joy of giving to donor bliss, this webinar presents ideas and actions for making donor bliss an institutional priority. Eric Billman is principal consultant and co-founder of Donor Bliss Consulting and co-author of the upcoming book, The Art and Science of Donor Bliss: Raise More Money, Make Friends, and Embrace the Joy of Giving. The book targets donors who want to more purposely pursue the joy of giving. As a consultant, Eric marries a donor-centric perspective with the discipline of strategic planning and performance management. His insights are gleaned from his experience as a global fundraiser and active donor.
Imagine a world where every donor experienced donor bliss. Imagine your organization where every donor experiences donor bliss. Think about your ideal donors or volunteers. Wouldn't it be great to have a few more of those? Today, I want to present an idea and the model of donor bliss, and also hope to persuade all those who listen to make donor bliss an institutional priority. We're going to look at the benefits of donor bliss for an organization. We'll look at the definition of donor bliss. We'll talk a little bit about who can experience donor bliss. Most of the presentation is about the journey, a donor's journey to donor bliss. And I like to think of it in terms of journey rather than just step by step, but that's another way to say it. And finally, we'll look at some ideas and some actions that you can take as an organization to enhance the donor's bliss along the way. The first benefit is additional resources. And looking at resources in the sense of Jim Collins, who defines them as more than just revenues, but they're revenues and time and brand. All these things go to helping deliver on the mission. The next thing is you'll have deeper engagement of donors and volunteers. Together, additional resources and deeper engagement give you the capacity to have greater impact on delivering on mission and realizing vision. These steps also help transform an organization's culture to one more described as a culture of philanthropy. And of course, it all leads to more joy in the world, and that's a great thing all by itself. There are two terms that I will use quite a bit today. The first is the joy of giving, that we define as the delight and sheer gladness experienced when making a thoughtful, significant, impactful gift. One of my favorite examples is a former boss who would carry umbrellas in the back of his car. And on days when it rained, he liked to drive up to someone and just give them an umbrella, that didn't have it. And the joy he had just telling the story of doing this is just such an excellent example of the joy that comes when we give in a thoughtful way to help others. The other term that's probably new is the idea of donor bliss. And I define donor bliss as the transformation of a donor's heart over time that adds fullness and meaning and satisfaction to this joy of giving. Sandra and I met a board member of a nonprofit in Chicago who was asked initially to give a small gift to help this organization that meets with underprivileged kids and gives them mentors and experience. She gave a small gift. They asked her to join the board now after 10 or 15 years on the board, and multiple gifts. Here is someone who truly has experienced the bliss of her support of this organization, both as a volunteer and as a donor. Who can experience donor bliss? The good news is that you can be young, you can be old. You can be rich, you can be poor, you can live in America, you can live anywhere in the world, you can be a Christian, a Muslim, an atheist. All, in fact, can experience donor bliss. It doesn't even take money to make a gift. We can give other things besides money. So anyone can experience donor bliss. I always think in this slide, Buddha had a quote that if people knew what I know about giving, they would not eat until they had given. That's a pretty radical, powerful statement. Mostly today we're going to look at a model. And the model, as you see, is one that starts with a desire for impact. It then goes into 3 self-reinforcing steps of passion, giving of self, and planning, moving on to finding an appropriate partner, and then over time, ultimately moving to a transformation into bliss. We'll look at each one of these steps by themselves, both at what the donor goes through and then what an organization can do on each step. So the first step is about the desire for impact. For donors who want to help others, they want to meet a need, ease suffering, improve condition, address or right or wrong. For themselves, they want to make life more worth living, they want to express their values, and they want to create a legacy. Those are the desired impacts of donors. Institutionally, the best thing organizations can do at this step of the journey is to express a clear and compelling mission. Mission lines up very nicely with impact. Share this mission frequently, share it on your website, share it on the screen when it comes up, put it on little posters around the office, and share results and the difference that your organization and their gifts have made, and in as many places and in as many ways as you can think of. Next, we enter this funnel, and the 3 things in this funnel reinforce one another. They're all important, they're all powerful, and yet together there's a synergy that happens. And the first is the idea of passion. So from a donor's perspective, passion is discovered, it is not created. If you're trying to think through what your passion is, you're looking in the wrong place. Passion is in your heart, it's not in your head. Passion belongs to the donor. It's not something that an institution can give them. Many people I've talked to in my career were unclear about their passion or their interests, and they need help to discover it. And this is where good development officers can really help. It may take a lifetime to find, and you only need a glimpse to start. Passion lines up with an institution's vision. So the first thing that an organization can do to create and enhance the joy of this step is paint a compelling vision about the future. What do you think the future could be? And then help donors discover their passion. This could be being an active listener by saying, is that what you really mean? Asking good questions. What would you like to do with your money that would be meaningful to you? Are good openers. And then ask, what else would you like to do with your money? Are good questions to help donors discover their passion, and then connect your vision to their passion. This has to be genuine and authentic. It can't be manufactured, but usually there's a way, if someone has a passion in this area, for you to show how they can pursue that passion and help create the vision that you have. Finally, ask donors and volunteers to be partners in this, as opposed to merely donors. The next step in this journey that also reinforces passion is the idea of giving of self. Passion is a rocket. Giving of self is the rocket fuel. And if we think again of the journey metaphor that I'm using here, there's a vehicle, now we have the fuel. Giving of self validates a donor's passion. So when you take action and become a volunteer or just do something a little bit, it resonates with that passion, and you know quickly whether you're on the right path or not and how to adjust it. Ways to give of self are time, ideas, talents. I've recently heard from several people, there's another one, it's network. So the ties that we have to others and sharing that network of people is another way we can give of ourselves. We get them connected. Volunteering puts a human face on our compassion. And we get to experience a connection with like-minded people and donors, which is a wonderful thing. Institutions call this engagement. It's where they engage and give donors opportunities to be involved as volunteers. And the best thing you can do is to create meaningful ways for people to help support your organization. Some ideas, advisory boards, create communities of interest, bring together thought leaders and offer lectures or interaction with them, have people provide a service. When I have worked at universities, a great way to do this is to have someone come in and talk to a class or to a club and get them involved that way. Everybody wins. Set up stewardship meetings between donors and recipients if that's appropriate. Certainly with scholarships it very much is. And arrange site visits and tours. I'm always reminded at a university I worked for, we had a lab that was way outdated and needed to be updated. And when we had a 50th reunion class come in, we gave them a tour of this lab. These guys looked around and said, 50 years ago when we were students, this lab needed to be updated. And it really needs it now, and as a result, we raised the money to be able to do so. Other things you can do is just ask. Ask people, ask your board, ask your donors, ask your volunteers, what kind of engagement would be meaningful to them. I will say that a lot of times these ideas aren't very good or they aren't things that you can do. That's okay. If you get an idea or two, it's good. You have asked them, which is also good. And whatever the result, please acknowledge what they have to say. A final word on this idea of engagement is that engagement opportunities have to meet two criteria. And the first is the work has to be real. Everybody sees through make work, engagement, volunteer activities, and it just makes everybody mad because it's a waste of everyone's time. So make sure the work is real and make sure that the volunteer has the ability to do what you need them to do. Steps along the way is the idea of planning. Planning, if you will, if we want to follow the journey metaphor, is the map. A lot of times planning is not something that a lot of donors do, and we would like to encourage them to think about doing a little more, whether it's superficial or in-depth, but look at what you have to contribute, whether it's time, talent, treasure, ties, as we talked about, network, and then align your giving plan with your passion, with your volunteering, because it all creates more impact and it all creates more joy. Allocate your resources to best achieve this desired impact. Again, planning means focus in some ways, and it means doing certain things, not doing others. And a final note about planning is involve family. I've seen a lot of people and a lot of donors who both did and did not, and when you do, the result is always a much better outcome. If nothing else, after you're gone, you have family members who also believe in this mission and want to continue and make sure it happens. Institutionally, planning is not a new concept at all. It usually comes down to a strategic plan. Strategic planning is efficient, it's effective, it communicates and delivers on mission and vision. It allows all levels of management and staff to embrace it. I'd like to highlight three areas that I think are of particular importance and particular power with planning. First is the idea of focus. Focus in a strategic plan for an institution allocates resources to their highest and best use. That by itself is one of the very powerful parts of planning. Focus requires discipline, in part because it lists what you will do, and it by omission it lists what you will not do. It protects executive directors because they can say, well, that's not in the plan. Sometimes there are wild ideas. I heard of one with an environmental organization recently where donors would say, you should have goats to keep all the grass mowed down. While that's a wonderful idea, it wasn't in the plan, and it would have been hugely resource intensive, taking away from the mission. So a plan protects that. I've seen a lot of plans where people say, well, these are our 3 priorities, and 6 months into it, something comes along and people will say, well, that should also be a priority. And if you're not careful, you have 10 priorities, which is the same as having none. So it does require a certain amount of discipline to stick to the plan, but that's where the real power of focus is. The second thing a plan does is it gets all the parts of an organization working in coordination. And in big organizations, this is especially difficult and especially important. It may require cascading from the top level to the vice presidential level to each one of those vice presidents' teams, and maybe even down another level. But the more they all align so that if each person does what their part of the plan is, the overall institution moves forward. This can be very difficult, and yet I think it's worth the effort to pursue. This is also the place where performance expectations are laid out. Our profession of development and nonprofits has a high level of turnover and burnout. I think one of the contributing factors is misaligned and unstated expectations, so that as we don't do what someone is expecting us to do but never said it, we look back. So getting them on paper in the alignment phase is very important to high performance and reducing that turnover, which will increase the organization's effectiveness. The third, I think, is probably the most neglected. So we take those strategic, specific, measurable objectives for each person, and then we review progress, monthly, quarterly, whatever seems most appropriate. Plans are made sometimes 6 months ahead of time, and we get halfway into an annual plan. We're now 12 months away from the assumptions that we made when we started. Things changed. We need to be nimble, we need to be responsive to new situations, still to accomplish our objectives, but the ways we do that may change. Accountability, frequent review allows us to be nimble. If we want to change the culture of our organizations, there's parts of it we would like to improve. The place where that happens is in this accountability phase. So I really have come down hard on the planning piece with good reason, because it's a very powerful thing both for donors and for institutions. It is said that donors who make a giving plan, their annual giving goes up because they realize what they have to give. Don't underestimate the power here. Kind of move from these three self-reinforcing pieces, and at this point donors begin to look for a partner. They realize that by themselves they can do certain things, but together they can do even more. Donors want to be a part of something larger than themselves. They want to leverage their gifts and skills and talents with those of others. They want to feel like an important part of an organization, and that speaks to being more than just a donor. That speaks to a much closer relationship. And at some levels, some have a difficulty finding appropriate partners. Those who have a great deal to give, finding appropriate organizations who can handle a large gift can be an issue, and where they feel that they are valued and not just an ATM machine. Make it easy to be a partner, to give, and then do what I think of basic blocking and tackling. Acknowledge gifts in 24 hours. Share what the gift will make happen, and then follow up and report what the gift was used for. And when possible, show the impact of the gift. Make these updates personalized. I know with a lot of annual giving, sometimes gifts are small and they're pooled together, but still as much as possible, talk about what those funds have made possible. Offer to help donors achieve their desired impact. Sometimes large donors may have a particular thing they'd like to see. Work with them to see how that particular thing fits with your mission, fits with your vision, and do it on purpose. And of course, those who have hung in there with you for the long term, who are involved, celebrate that long-term involvement. Make them feel important. The other thing is that not everyone wants to be a partner. There are different levels of being engaged and a part of the whole thing, so have a variety of different things from more personal to less personal to accommodate this. We've talked about some of these. Form communities of interest, make it easy to be a part of a group. Form personal relationships with those who do want to get involved and get close. Make them feel like a peer, like a partner, not merely donor-recipient, but we're in this together, working together for the same end. Customize. I find a really powerful way to build trust is to share your challenges with those who are close, to say it's not all perfect. We don't always do what we think we're going to do. We've run into a problem. Our scholarship recipient didn't go to class and dropped out of school, sorry. Whatever it is, share that, because that authenticity helps build trust, that you're not just selling something and everything isn't all smooth all the time. And again, just to say, treat each donor like a valued partner. And finally, there's some great information technology tools that help you do this. Use them. You can segment in different ways. CRMs help us track information and preferences. Use them to customize what you do with those who want to be involved. The next step in this process is kind of along those lines. There will be bumps in the road. In any close relationship, there are bumps in the road. Donors and volunteers assume an implicit promise of how they will be treated, that they'll be respected, that they'll be valued and appreciated and acknowledged. They get frustrated when these expectations are not met, and the longer they are not met, the more frustrated they get. You don't want this to happen. There are a number of things to do when we hit these bumps in the road, and the first is to be proactive and anticipate them. Sometimes things are pretty clear, it's coming down the road. Take the action before it actually does happen to avoid it. Also, it's important to remind yourself, your staff, and your donors and volunteers what the mission and the vision are. Why are we doing this and working together? Because a lot of times remembering that will help us take our eye off this immediate problem, whatever it is. Remember why we actually are in this together. When there are issues, be responsive. Follow up quickly, share what your solution was. And continue this active listening. Continue saying, I believe your frustration is this. Am I correct? And if I'm not, then keep probing until you get it. I'm reminded a university that I worked for, we had built a building that was 100% philanthropic funded, which is rare in universities. Usually they raise half the money and borrow the rest. So we had 180 fairly significant donors. And we got, as we were about to open it, we found that no one had budgeted for donor recognition. And one of our larger donors, who had given an 8-figure gift to this building, was also on the university's board of trustees, got wind of this problem, flew in his jet with his architect, called a meeting with the vice presidents of finance, operations, and facilities, of advancement. My dean was there, and I got to be there to take notes. And he pretty much laid out why this was wrong and why recognizing donors appropriately was the right thing to do, and that we should find the money. We toured the building. He said the Bruno wall should be right here. And when he left, we found the money, and that's exactly what we did. But I was always grateful that he had what it took so that we would do the right thing. That was a bump. We got over it. The relationship remained strong with not only him, but other donors. Finally, be a good steward. I have asked different people, what does bumps in the road and how you deal with them look like? Several people said, if I give you $20, don't send me $50 worth of mailings. That's being a good steward. Make sure you're using gifts to pursue the mission and the vision and not waste them. Finally, we get to my favorite part of this, and it is the transformation. Moving from joy at each step, the joy that really belongs to the donor at each step, to the transformation into bliss. It just always strikes me that we start out to make an impact, to have an impact, to change the world in some small or large way, and we find over time that the true transformation and the true impact is in our own hearts, that they are changed. The best way to describe that change I have found is that we come to understand why it is more blessed to give than to receive. It's what happens with us. But the transformation doesn't stop there. Institutions that make pursuing donor bliss a priority are also transformed. They become more human, more compassionate, more connected with those they serve. Fundraising becomes vision sharing and the presentation of opportunities to participate in that vision. And because we have those meaningful long-term relationships and fundraising has shifted, it gives us greater capacity for greater scope and impact of what we want to do. To conclude, we've looked at how institutions benefit from embracing a culture that cultivates donor bliss. We've looked at how donor bliss is defined and seen in many faces of those who experience donor bliss. We followed a donor's journey from the desire for impact to donor bliss, and we've looked at some detailed action steps and ideas that any organization can implement to make donor bliss an institutional priority. So I leave you again with these benefits: additional resources, donors and volunteers more involved, greater impact, an organization and its people are transformed, and more joy in the world. And I ask you to join us in making donor bliss an institutional priority. I am now happy to entertain questions.
The concept of donor bliss is engaging, human, and universal. More and more organizations are seeking to engage millennials. So how does the concept of donor bliss resonate with this very important millennial segment of donors?
Thank you. I think it resonates very well. I think with any group, we want to treat them with respect. We want to value their unique contributions, which may not always be monetary. We want to listen to what they bring and have to say. I'm reminded of a story of a friend who is a millennial who told me that he joined a board and was appointed to a committee of one. His comment was, I kind of felt like I was still sitting at the kids' table. Right? We don't want to do that. And we don't want to presume that just because you're a millennial, you can fix our computer system or even want to. So I think understanding what makes each person's contribution valuable and meeting people where they are. I think with millennials, I've been reading a lot that helping millennials get up to speed on the things that they may not know, being clear about our expectations of what we think board members should be doing from the very beginning. All these things work well with millennials, but they work well with anybody in any dimension of diversity. And actually, even if you've got a board full of baby boomers, it's still the right way to approach it. So I think this works very, very well with millennials as it does with anyone else. Yes, Eric.
So how does donor bliss speak to the stewardship of the family instead of just one individual, and how do you envision the role of the family in the giving process?
That's a good question. We talked briefly a little bit about how involving families in planning from a donor point of view is so important. An example I have, we had a gift at another university, someone who was involved a long time as a board member, as a volunteer, as a donor, but during the campaign wanted to do something very significant. And we met with this individual first to see in what general area would that be interested to him, but very quickly we made sure that his wife, his children, and actually his grandchildren were all involved in the discussions. We brought to the campus 2 or 3 times, gave them a tour. In this case, it was a Center for Neural Engineering, so we toured them through the brain bank, through the 3D printer that prints brain tissue, and got them excited about it. And actually, we developed a device that by blowing into and on an iPhone, an EMT could find what the oxygen level in the blood was in just seconds. And our donor's like, well, why would anyone want to do that? And his daughter, who was an athlete, said, I would want that right away. So actually the family reinforced the gift. And I think over time, as the parents age, they will become involved in their own right. So I think it's a good question, and I always encourage, get the family involved. Don't make them surprised with your estate plans. Any other questions? Thank you all for coming.
Most recently, Eric developed and implemented an international engagement plan for Earlham College, bringing together key internal constituents and alumni. Previously, he served as Director of Advancement for the University of Melbourne and the University of Queensland in Australia, Senior Director of Development at Georgetown University, and at the University of Wisconsin. In addition to work in higher education, Eric has provided campaign and development counsel to hospitals, community organizations, religious institutions, and schools. He started his development career at his alma mater, Carnegie Mellon University. Over the course of his career, Eric has worked with donors and volunteers around the world, helping them to experience the joy of giving and enabling organizations to better deliver on their mission. Eric is passionate about donor bliss and its power to transform individuals and institutions. Eric earned a BS in civil engineering from Purdue University and received his MBA from Carnegie Mellon University. Eric and his wife are residents of Richmond, Indiana.